Hi everyone, welcome to the 9th episode of Dose of Derm, a dermatology guide for medical students. My name is Emma Holjak.
And my name is Iryna Savinova. And today we are excited to share a very special episode with you all that will be focused on all things residency applications and CaRMS. We are joined by three amazing guests who are all first-year dermatology residents at different Canadian universities, and we are so excited to introduce you all to all of them. So first, we have Dr. Camille Hamm, a first-year resident at the University of Ottawa. She completed her MD at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine University in Thunder Bay, Ontario, where she was born and raised. Prior to medical school, she completed a Bachelor of Sciences in nursing and worked for 1 year as a registered nurse both in Thunder Bay and Ottawa. She was recently released from the Canadian Armed Forces, where she worked as a Naval Warfare Officer in the Naval Reserves over the last 10 years. Outside of medicine, she loves to spend time outdoors, running, biking, and cross-country skiing.
And next up, we'd like you to meet Dr. Abrahim Abduelmula from the University of Toronto, who completed his MD at Western University prior to starting residency. Prior to medical school, Dr. Abrahim completed his Bachelor of Nursing degree from the University of Windsor, and outside of medicine, he enjoys watching TV and relaxing.
And finally, meet Dr. Jessica Ho from McGill University. She completed her MD at Queen's University and has a Bachelor of Science from the University of British Columbia, as well as a master's degree in public health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the UK. She worked with the World Health Organization in Geneva in the Department of Global Capacities, Alert and Response, as well as with the Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, in Toronto and Montreal. She was also a member of Canada's rhythmic gymnastics national team for over 10 years with the highest rank of second in the country. So without further ado, welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on our podcast.
Okay, so to get us started, the first question we wanted to open with is we'd love to hear from you all briefly about your journey to dermatology and what it was like to match into your program. And to get us started, maybe we will ask Dr. Hamm.
Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of funny, but I probably wanted to be a dermatologist, I think, since I was 15. And this is without any prior exposure to derm, not really a clue what the job what the job entailed. So anyways, fast forward into undergrad, I did nursing, and then I worked on both a medical oncology unit in Thunder Bay and a surgical unit in Ottawa. And I really loved it. And I found I really had a passion for wound care and kind of all things skin assessment. So when I got into medical school, I kind of had an inkling of thought that I might want to do dermatology. So it's something that I looked into doing further. I got to do some research and some shadowing in first year in medical school in derm, and it really reinforced my love for the specialty. I really loved kind of the fast-paced environment, the ability to do small procedures and have a really varied practice, which is ultimately why I chose to go into this. And I also find it a really motivating area of medicine to be in, because you can really empower your patients and through those relationships that you develop. So yeah, it was kind of a natural choice for me to go to medical school. I kind of ruled out a few other things. Couldn't stand surgery because I literally passed out every time I stepped into an OR. And I liked the kind of mix of medicine and just like quick clinical assessments with derm. So that's why I chose that.
That was great. Thank you so much. And maybe next up, could we hear from Dr. Ho?
Sure, and thanks for having all of us on the podcast. So I think I was always interested in dermatology, but it wasn't really on my radar going into medical school. So coming from a public health background, I was definitely more interested in something that was directly transferable, especially having worked with Doctors Without Borders. So I was actually initially thinking of becoming an OBGYN because I felt like that was like a great mix of surgery as well as medicine. But after doing kind of a little bit of shadowing and observerships, I feel like it just felt like I wanted to work with a larger and more diverse patient population. So I only really discovered dermatology near the end of my first year, kind of through the dermatology interest group. They had an event like Day in the Life of a Dermatologist. And I just remember, hearing about all the very complex chronic conditions that dermatologists deal with, but also the quick and easy kind of surgical procedures. And it just felt like something that would be a really good fit from the things I did like about OBS Guide. but also kind of being able to see kids, adults, men, women, females and males. So I think from there, that's kind of how I got interested in research and kind of dived a little bit deeper into it. And like Camille said, it's a great mix of medicine. There's procedures. You really do get to see everything, and it's like a fast-paced clinic. So I think those are all things that really attracted me as well.
And then Dr. Abraham Abduelmula, did you have anything to add about your journey towards derm?
Yeah, so I mean, great things said from the both of you. I think you pretty much covered all the bases. For me personally, I think I had a very systematic approach to kind of picking dermatology as a specialty. You know, I started kind of top down. I pretty much did observerships in everything, and just slowly rolled out. I had this Excel sheet, and I was like, nope, nope, nope. And, I come from Windsor, Ontario, so there isn't really a lot of opportunities to do dermatology. But, so I kind of put it on the back burner for a bit. And then the pandemic hit, and everything went online, and you had a lot more options to kind of be flexible. And I started working as an RN in Kitchener-Waterloo area, so I was doing some COVID work there. And ultimately at that point, I decided I wanted to give dermatology another shot. This was right around the end of my first year, just like Jessica. And I decided to really mass email and reach out, and I kind of did what I could to gain experience. I got involved with research, and yeah, but for all the same reasons they mentioned, dermatology is an amazing field, and I'm very happy that I have the privilege to be here today.
Thank you all for sharing that. I think it's just coincidental and kind of cool that you both have that overlapping background in nursing. We didn't plan that, but that's very cool. And congratulations again on successfully making it through the CaRMS process and being here to share your advice with everyone. So for this episode, we actually released an opportunity to our Instagram followers to submit a few questions, which we compiled to cover a good breadth of questions, hopefully throughout this podcast, so that this episode is as useful as it can be. So the first question was whether you had any advice on matching to dermatology at a school that isn't your home school, especially if your home school doesn't have a dermatology residency program. And I see you smiling, so Dr. Abraham, is that the question you want to take?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So I'll start by saying I think all three of us didn't have a home program. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think none of us did. So I think there's lots for everyone to add on to this kind of topic. But I guess I'll go first with kind of regarding my journey. So yeah, like I said, I was in the Windsor campus of Western, so this was even further out from London. So London's already very pressed for dermatologists, but Windsor even more so. So it was very difficult to get that kind of experience, and I think it ultimately came down to reaching out and trying to find the experience wherever I could. Sometimes locally it may not always work, so I mass emailed. I think that's the go-to for everyone, and I think I got very lucky that I was able to get involved with a research project, and from then on I did quite a bit of research. And I just kept on looking for opportunities where there were, with interest groups and other kind of extracurriculars, and slowly built my way from there. But ultimately, I think it was just about looking for the opportunities. And yeah, I think it's possible even if you don't have a home program. Every year we see this, but I'll let the other two add on.
Yeah, I think similar to you, Abe, NOSM doesn't have a derm program. We only have 4 dermatologists that teach through NOSM. So even securing electives in derm in 4th year when you couldn't do traveling electives was really, really challenging. So I had to really reach out to either residents that had previously graduated from NOSM to see if they had any opportunities through their programs for research, and just kind of getting my name out there a little bit. And then in 1st year, I was able to, I just started, like what you did. I was sending out cold emails to people being like, hey, I'm interested in research. I have no background, but I'm willing to work. I'm really interested in derm. Will you let me help out? And I think in general, that was really well received. And yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much more to add, but I feel like it's interesting that we all come from schools that don't have any derm programs. And I think in a way, for me at least, it definitely motivated me more to get more involved, because I knew I was already at a disadvantage in the sense that, I don't have any residents, I don't have any program at my home school to kind of really get to know me and particularly in the context of no away electives, I feel like it really did give me a little bit of a push to really, go for it, and email as many people as I could and get involved in as much research as I could. So I think I was also really lucky. We have some dermatologists in Kingston at Queen's, and through them, I think they were really great mentors, and that can be a benefit of a smaller program as well. So having, people there that'll really vouch for you, that you can work with extensively in research as well as clinically, and they really are able to kind of advocate for you in the, CaRMS process. But having research outside of my homeschool, I think, was also really important, just to build connections.
That was great. Thank you all so much for sharing that advice with us. Our next question that we wanted to talk a little bit about could be viewed as a little bit controversial. And so the topic is parallel planning. We were wondering if you were comfortable speaking about it, if any of you parallel planned with any other specialties, or if you could speak to your thoughts on parallel planning in general. I'll kind of open up the floor to anyone who wants to comment on that if they would like.
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one. Start us off. I think like parallel planning, especially with a really competitive specialty like derm, is really important, because ultimately you can put in all your best efforts to be the strongest candidate, crush your interviews and do absolutely amazing, but the spots are so limited. So I think parallel planning is good to also be realistic with yourself too. And for me, I parallel planned with family medicine, something that I was also very interested in throughout medical school. And also we spend a lot of time in family medicine, mostly rurally. So this is something that I could also see myself doing. And many of the electives that I used to prepare myself for derm ultimately translated over well to family medicine. So I think those are two specialties that, you can easily apply to both at the same time through CaRMS, and it not look like you're going more one way versus the other.
Yeah, I think I can probably add to that as well. I personally was very okay with parallel planning, just because I knew, like personally, like emotionally through the CaRMS process as well, it's something that I'd be more comfortable with. And I still love so many other areas of medicine that I knew I'd be happy if I didn't match to derm and was able to do something else. So I also parallel family medicine, but I also applied to a few internal programs as well, because I think that was a little bit of a kind of last minute interest of mine. Kind of later on in clerkship, I realized I do really like internal medicine as well. So I actually parallel planned with family medicine and internal medicine. And I think personally for me, that was the right choice. I felt like I was just a lot less stressed throughout CaRMS, and just knowing that I'd be happy matching somewhere at least. And even in the interview process, like having more interviews than just the dermatology programs was helpful for me.
Yeah, I guess not much to add for that. I think for me, I wanted to find out kind of a day earlier. So with CaRMS, it'll tell you if you matched, and then I think a day later it'll tell you where you matched. So the big brain plan here was that if I didn't parallel plan, I know I'd match a day earlier, which in hindsight wasn't a very good plan, but I do think it's important to understand kind of how competitive the field is, and understanding what you want for yourself. And then you get into discussions of whether doing a 5th year or applying again is worth it, and ultimately I knew that regardless, I mean, the second iteration does exist. So maybe I wouldn't have gotten my choice of kind of location, but I was okay with that. And I knew it wouldn't have been the end of the world, but yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think it's great to hear some like differing approaches, and we appreciate the honesty. If you're bold enough to do that, then you could take Abe's approach. But that's very interesting to hear. I actually got some advice that kind of, I think, is similar to what you all were saying, in that dermatology, you really get to see it in a lot of specialties. So even if you don't end up pursuing dermatology as your final residency in internal medicine through like allergy or rheumatology or even just family medicine, you do get those little pearls of derm and skin everywhere. So I think a lot of people could find something special in a lot of different specialties, which I think is special to derm. I don't know if every other specialty can say that. So we'll jump into our next question. We got this one a few times. It is about reference letters. So I think there seems to be a lot of anxiety surrounding how to get strong reference letters, or how to even get to the point in a rotation where you feel like this would be the right time to ask for a letter and that it would be strong. So we wanted to ask what your experiences were in asking for reference letters, and did you have any sort of strategy in going about obtaining them? Like, did you only ask someone that you worked with an X amount of time with, or did you really ask anyone who you felt good about?
So yeah, I guess I'll start with this one. I do think this probably will vary between every individual, and there's lots of different approaches and lots of programs look at things different ways. So I don't think there's a one size fits all cookie cutter approach. For me personally, I did know that reference letters are an important aspect of, and I do think this is something that can be disputed, but I do think reference letters are very important. And because of that, I kind of set the goal to have dermatology only reference letters when I applied. Now, I think for all of us, we didn't have traveling electives, so we may not be able to answer kind of the whole going away and obtaining these letters. So it was a unique problem for us that we had to kind of figure out how to get these letters, and programs are very understanding of this. And to that, they even reduced the number of letters needed. I believe it was 2 to 3 for most programs. I think 2 for most. But regardless, some schools would accept more and some schools would accept less. And ultimately, I think you want the strongest letters from the people who will vouch for you the strongest. And that's just my kind of approach. It's always nice to get a program director to write you a letter, or someone who you think might have some sort of significant pull within a program. But at the same time, how well do they know you, and how strong is that letter going to be, right? Because if you worked with your community dermatologist for 4 years and they know you extremely well, they've seen you in all sorts of situations, you've done research with them, they're going to write you a glowing review. And dermatology is a small community, so these are recognizable names versus everyone says, oh, get a letter from so and so, they're so cool and amazing, but at the same time, you may have only had 1 day of FaceTime, if not less, worked on one case report or something. And I doubt that letter is going to be that strong, but that's kind of just my opinion.
Yeah, see, for me, I didn't have all dermatology references, like all dermatologist references when I applied. I previously worked with a plastic surgeon and a rheumatologist on a few pre-clerkship electives as well. So then going back into 4th year, I had a good working relationship with them. And these are people that I knew would write me some good, strong letters. So depending on the program, I had like my derm references, and I also had these reference letters from this plastic surgeon and rheumatologist that I kind of pick and chose like where I use them. But yeah, I think I agree with Abe. Like ultimately, you want to pick the letters that you think are going to showcase like your strengths and stuff coming from somebody that knows you well and has worked with you. And I think that often comes from people either at your home school, or if you spent a lot of time with somebody on an away elective, then those are good people to approach.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have too much more to add. I guess in terms of when to ask for a letter, I think a lot of us had longitudinal relationships with our referees. So I think it was kind of just something that came about naturally. But in rotations, I think, some people say to ask like the first day and just bring it up kind of thing. I personally found that it was almost better to show that you were adept clinically and that you worked hard, maybe towards the end of the first week before you kind of brought up the subject, so that they'd be kind of in a better spot to kind of vouch for you and actually agree to do a letter for you, and that it would be a strong one. So I think personally, in terms of if you only had short rotations, maybe give it a few days, let them know you're interested in the specialty, and then once they've seen that you work hard and you do well, kind of bring it up, and then you can kind of gauge the reaction from there.
Thank you so much. So it seems like, to kind of summarize that, the approach that many of you went with is going with the letters that would be stronger because of longitudinal relationships, as opposed to maybe people who you would think have stronger sway in the committee. So I think that was a helpful tip for sure. Another question that we received was about research and the extent of research that successful applicants typically had within the field, dermatology specifically. So we had questions regarding whether any of you would share how many publications you applied within the field, although I know sometimes that can get scary and maybe send the wrong message. So however you want to talk about maybe your own research experience, or how you think, what kind of weight that carries in your application, that would probably be a good place to start maybe.
So when I started med school, I had zero research background, like literally zero publications to my name, had no idea where to really even start. So I was very new to it. So I think for people starting off in medical school in a similar place to me, don't panic. You can definitely learn from people. I think when I applied to CaRMS, I think I only had 2 published publications, and then I had maybe a handful of other ones awaiting review from journals. But some of these were just, like little case reports. Most of them weren't like really big research projects or anything of that sort. I think certain programs in more academic centers might want to see higher numbers from applicants, but other programs might not care that much. They might just want to see that you've had a little bit of interest in a specialty and done research and, in and around some topics related to dermatology. So it really depends. Yeah, for me, it was like an area that I identified as being maybe a bit more weak on my application. So that's just something that I worked on throughout med school.
Thank you for sharing and being honest about that. I think, it seems like people have different approaches, whether their application is going to be research heavy or heavy on some other aspect.
Yeah, I can go next. So I feel like I actually quite enjoyed research in medical school. So it was something that I did out of interest. And I think I would choose projects either because the topic was interesting to me or the methodology. And I felt like, I could learn something from it. So at CaRMS, I think I had about 8 publications, but 2 were from before as well. So I feel like it's not like too many compared to some people, but it definitely was maybe a heavier part of my application. And I think you can definitely balance it out more to have more extracurriculars that show your interest in derm instead of just publications. So yeah, I think, do it if you enjoy it, because it'll be a lot more fun and productive for you as well as your whole team. And I know a lot of people that it ranges, right? You can have, no publications to people that do a lot more. And it's just kind of based on your own interest and kind of your own path.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's been said. And kind of before I go on, I'm going to preface this by saying I completely agree. I don't think you need publications to match into dermatology. But at the same time, and from my perspective, that is all I could really have. We had no traveling electives, no home program. For me, that is the only thing I could really rely on come time for, CaRMS, and obviously with the relationships I've built along the way. But ultimately, that was really the only physical thing I could rely on. So for me, and I mean, this is something you can look up online, right? You can look at anyone, just Google their name. So, there's really no point in not saying, I guess. So when I applied to CaRMS, I had around 30 publications, and it was I had zero research background as well, prior to medical school, but I learned to like research quite a bit. It was very intimidating. And I do think that's one thing that, if you haven't done it before, it can be very intimidating. But just like anything, just like medicine, you can learn research methodology and, how to perform. And it was also a really good way to, expose myself to dermatology and really keep a working relationship. And while I maybe wasn't living in Toronto or Ottawa or, any other place, Calgary, any other place in Canada, I was able to kind of work with people across Canada in this way, right? And, COVID did help with that a lot since everything was shut down and it was kind of online interactions. But I do think it really worked to build those longitudinal relationships that, I think were very helpful when CaRMS came around.
I think that it just goes to show that you can have a whole range of publications when you're applying, and all of you match dermatology. So I actually think that was a really great showcase of how things can be different, and you don't have to necessarily reference yourself to someone else who got in. So thank you for being honest.
Right. So we're going to kind of shift a little bit, and we were hoping to next talk a little bit about interviews, if that's okay with everyone. So I think that this area, it's often not talked about a lot. Obviously, there's some confidentiality stuff that goes into it. So we won't ask you guys to touch in too much detail about what goes on, but there is a whole lot of anxiety about the process with students as a result. So we were wondering if you would be able to speak a little bit about what your interview process was like, maybe what you did to prepare.
Yeah, I guess I can start for this one. So I'm going to preface it by kind of saying that I think in terms of interviews, when it comes time for residency, it's a lot different than medical school. I don't think necessarily having a lot of interviews correlates to, an increased chance of matching. Maybe on a statistical, numerical level, it does, I guess. But, I really don't think there's like a huge correlation. You could have one interview and be, the favorite to match at a school because you've built such a good relationship with that group of individuals and, they really want you and that's your only interview, right? Or you could have interviews across Canada and, you haven't really worked with anyone. It's just the way the straws are pulled and, you got a lot of interviews. So that's kind of what I want to start off by saying. For me personally, I do think I fared quite well in terms of receiving interviews, but ultimately, for me, I do think that, there was often times where I felt like I didn't build a strong relationship with a school per se, and that's just being human, right? I don't think you can, work with 10 schools in super deep depth and, know everyone, and it's just not possible. But at the same time, in terms of expectations for what I kind of felt with interviews, I mean, they're interviews, right? They're questions, they get to know you. It's a panel. Some are cold, some are warm, some are very cold. But ultimately, it's they're just trying to see how you react and how you interview and get a better grasp for you as a person if they know you, or sorry, if they don't know you, and see how you interview if they do. So
Yeah, I think like the number of interviews you get kind of varies on how many programs you apply to, how many applications are received that year by a program, and ultimately luck too, I think plays a big role in the CaRMS process. Similar to Abe, like I applied to all programs across Canada. I applied to return of service programs, and I applied to everywhere. And just McGill and none of the other schools in Quebec, and did quite well throughout the CaRMS process. For prep, there's this really good resource through the CFMS. Actually, they put it out to fourth-year medical students every year, so people should be receiving emails about this. But it's a program where there's a mentorship program through CFMS where they match you with usually a junior resident in the specialty that you're applying to. So I had a really excellent derm resident from UT that helped me prepare for my interviews, had some resources to share with me, and we did some practice one-on-one, which I found really helped kind of ease any anxiety that I had going into the interview process. And it was also somebody that I didn't know super well personally too. So it made the practicing feel a little bit more real than maybe if I was just practicing with like one of my parents or one of my friends or something, for example. I think this all being said, though, it's good to practice some of the more common questions that might be asked, just like who you are, tell us about your background, whatever. But you want to avoid over practicing because then sometimes you can sound a little rehearsed. And ultimately, like the CaRMS process is about learning who you are as a person and why you're interested in that specialty and if you're going to be a good match with the program. So they're looking to find out, if you would be a good fit. And I think it's also a good opportunity for you to see if you would be a good fit for their program too, because the match is a two-way street.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have too much more to add, but yeah, definitely I think practicing helps before interviews, just to kind of get a better sense of how you present your own CV, so you really know your research well, so you really know your motivations and your passions well. And otherwise, yeah, I think it is different from medical school interviews, but I think in terms of the preparation, it can be quite similar. Just finding friends that you trust and kind of can practice together, I think really helps.
That was great. Thank you all so much. I kind of have actually a little bit of a follow-up to that, probably more for Dr. Hamm and Dr. Ho. But if you were, because you mentioned you applied to multiple specialties within the parallel planning process. Was it difficult if you interviewed in multiple specialties, kind of prepping for two different types of interviews all at once? Or did you notice that they were both kind of similar, so there was a lot of overlap?
Yeah, I would say like in general, I kind of just tried to prepare generally for both types of interviews, like for both my family and my dermatology interviews. There might be more specific questions like, about like your motivations for pursuing a certain specialty. So that's something I just kind of, spent some time thinking about, okay, what are things that I want to kind of convey throughout my interviews. But otherwise, the preparation, I would say, I felt relatively the same with the interview process. I thought it was very similar.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing I really did was maybe I tried to separate kind of the specialties. So I kind of blocked them together. So it felt like I wasn't just, switching from one day I'm talking about why I'm interested in this specialty, then why I'm talking about derm. So just keeping them all together kind of just kept me in like a more similar mindset. And then I could kind of just switch once I was done with a certain block of interviews to, derm, and then just make sure I really know my derm stuff really well.
Did either of you run into issues with overlapping interviews? Because I'm assuming like with family medicine, internal and derm, they don't really probably talk to each other or set up those interview times.
I know with family medicine, since there's often more spots, they will have more interview dates and times. So I felt it was relatively easy to kind of schedule around any derm interviews I had.
Oh, great. Okay, so before we jump into a few fun rapid fire questions, we wanted to ask whether each of you could share a piece of advice for anyone currently going through the CaRMS process, maybe something you wish you knew or any words of wisdom, anything like that.
I think it's pretty simple, but when you're applying to a competitive specialty, I think it can be very overwhelming and really stressful at times. I know I often felt that way throughout medical school. And I would often get a similar response from people when they'd ask me what I was interested in, and I would reply derm. And they automatically jump to, oh, are you backing up with anything? And while that's a very fair question to ask, I think it kind of sometimes made me doubt my ability to be successful in matching in derm. So when I kind of switched my mentality to why not me? Like, why can't I be the one matching to derm and doing this? Then I felt a lot more confident in myself. And if you continue to work hard and setting yourself up for success to be a competitive applicant, there's no reason that you can't match.
Yeah, I think, CaRMS is a big process with like a lot of moving parts. And I think one thing that helps me was just focusing on the thing right in front of me. So if it was electives, just focusing on doing well on electives. If it was, writing your essays or, kind of just making it so that you weren't worrying about interviews before you had to, and kind of just focusing on the thing in front of you. And I felt like that made it a lot less overwhelming just because you were kind of making it a little bit easier to kind of know what you should be working on at that moment. And I think, the most important part is to like try to enjoy it, I guess. Like, I think especially clinically, it was like the electives and stuff were a lot of fun. And I think if you enjoy those and work hard during those, it really does come through in your reference letters. And then the rest is kind of just managing your own emotions and expectations throughout the process, which I feel like is a very personal path, but everyone eventually gets through it.
Yeah, so I guess for me, if I had to give some advice, once you've narrowed in on a specialty that you want to do, I think it's definitely worth it to start putting in that investment. A lot of people say relax, you're only in first year, relax second year, third, fourth, but I take the other approach where, if you've decided you wanted to do dermatology, just get to work, right? Like, the work you've put in along the way won't, and you hear stories of people matching, a week before CaRMS deciding they want to do something else, and that's totally fine. But I think the time you put in advance won't betray you for the most part. And I do think that security was really helpful when, it came closer to CaRMS, not in the sense that, I know I'm going to match, I was stressing like everyone, I didn't sleep for days, but just knowing that I did what I could up until that point and, the job was done and it was time to just leave it to fate.
If I can just add to that, I think that brings up a really good point because I feel like everyone always tells you, don't zero in on dermatology right away. Make sure you keep your options open throughout clerkship if you're earlier on in medicine. And I think that's something you definitely can still do, but it doesn't mean you can't, put in the work early to make sure that if you do decide to do the competitive specialty, you'll have it ready. And I do think it's important to, still be open during clerkship and figure out if you love these other things, but it doesn't kind of make it mutually exclusive.
That's really great advice. Thank you all for sharing that.
And that wraps up kind of the first and the bulk of our Q&A panel, but the next thing we wanted to get to was our rapid fire questions. So the first thing that we have to ask you all, it's a little bit cliche, but we start all of this part of the podcast with this question is, do you have a favorite skincare product?
It's embarrassing asking it, but we get great answers every time, so it's kind of our go-to.
I really love the La Roche-Posay Cicaplast in the winter. I put it on my entire face. I probably shouldn't, but I do.
I think personally at McGill, I don't know if I'm allowed to actually say any product, so I will have to refrain from commenting.
Can we say sunscreen? Is that a safe derm answer?
Sunscreen for sure.
Yeah, just probably retinoids, low dose retinoids.
Do you have a favorite percent?
No.
That's fair. Our second question is, would you rather have the power to instantly learn any new skill or have unlimited access to a lifetime supply of your favorite food? And this doesn't have to be a really well thought out answer.
Skills. You can use the skills to make money and then buy as much food as you want.
I agree with that answer.
Okay. So is that unanimous, Dr. Ho?
Yeah, I think skill for me as well. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have our final question then. So it's another would you rather. Would you rather have the ability to communicate with animals or instantly know the answer to any question you're asked?
Definitely know the answer to any question I'm asked, particularly I think for dermatology boards.
I agree. It's 5 years away and I'm already stressed about it.
Dr. Abraham, do you dare say communicate with animals then?
Yeah, actually communicate with animals. I feel like that would be fun. And, it's like the questions that someone asks you, you know the answer to, right? Animals, I'm sure have, I don't know, infinite wisdom or something. I don't know.
Sure. Maybe they have all the answers all along. So who knows?
To the boards.
Yeah.
To the boards.
Hey, we don't know. We haven't been able to do that yet. Okay, well, thank you all for being such good sports. Those questions kind of came out of nowhere, so we appreciate you still answering them. And on that note, I wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining us and for sharing your words of wisdom and all your advice. We hope this will help anyone applying to residency this cycle, and hopefully this makes the process seem a little bit less daunting. To all our listeners and anyone currently going through the process right now, thank you so much for listening, and we wish you all the best of luck. You can stay up to date on our next episodes by following us on Instagram and Twitter at Skin Curriculum, or visiting our website, which is www.skincurriculum.com. Otherwise, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Dose of Derm, and we hope you all take care.